So now is where we are going to determine the corner of our bag. First I'm going to trim the excess strips because I'm not going to need these. So what you want to do is take your bag and we're going to pull to sort of pull it apart to get that corner to lay flat. Okay, so you want to get your seams going in opposite directions. So what I mean there is this seam is facing this way. My bottom seam I have going that way. You want to make sure you're lining up your seams so you get a nice even corner. So that's what we're going to use to determine how wide we're going to make our bag. So make sure it's nice and flat in there. You don't want to be getting any extra fabric because we don't want to be cutting anything we don't mean to cut. So I put my hand in my bag to get to that corner to really make sure it's going to be flat. The rule of thumb is however far in you go, your bag will be double that. So if I go in just 2 inches, okay, 2 inches from my corner right here, then my bag will be 4 inches wide. And that feels pretty good. We're gonna actually sew across that. Inside the bag, no one's ever gonna see it. Okay, so after you've marked both your corners, we are going to go ahead and sew across the lines that we made. You can trim your corners off, but we're going to turn it inside out first just to check and make sure that everything is measuring the way we thought it was going to before we do that step. Okay, so like I said, yes, we can trim those off, but first let's turn this right side out and make sure that this is as expected. So you can see that. Looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. So we can flip this back out, trim our corners, and on to the lining. Okay, everyone, we have reached our final stages where we are going to sew our lining and get this bag put together. So we want to take our lining fabric and place it folding along that crease, fold it insides facing, get it nice and even. We're going to sew up from the bottom. On one side, we're going to sew all the way up. On the other side, we want to sew about 10 inches up from the bottom and then stop. We need to leave a hole for us to pull the bag through that we'll go back and stitch up. So just so I don't forget, I'm just gonna mark it with a clip. And I'm gonna leave, I don't know, maybe 5-6 inches and then sew it all the way up. So I'm gonna stop about there and pick it back up. So I use a pin. Pick it back up. I mean, it's a fairly sturdy bag, so I'm gonna pick it back up maybe right around this point. So maybe about 5 inches from the top. So give me a good sized hole to pull this bag through and not have to struggle too much. So let's sew. Okay, so again, on the other side, still sewing up from the bottom, but I'm going to stop about 10 inches up, right about there, leave a hole, and then sew to the top. Okay. We want our lining to be turned back right side out. I like to get my fingers right into those corners and get that all the way pushed out. So we want our bag inside out, which it already is, and the lining right side out. We're going to slide this lining into the bag, tucking it into the corners, because remember, we're going to flip it. So when we flip it, then the lining will be going right side. We're going to pause. We didn't box our corners. In order for this to lay right, we need to box the corners just like we did the bag. Again, have to get it to lay flat. Get that nice and even. We want it flat underneath there so we're not cutting anything we don't intend to cut. So that's good. And again, you can do this one of two ways. You can measure up, you can use the width that you know we used. Okay, so now that we've boxed our corners, we're going to turn this inside out, or right side out, excuse me. See, we've got your nice squared bottom now. With this facing out, with our bag inside out, we are going to tuck this into the bag and really tuck it into the corners. Keep in mind, we've got that hole on one side. So once we tuck it in and we sew it, we're going to pull the bag through that hole. I'm just going to put the lining on the inside of it. So let's tuck this in, and definitely going to use your hands to get the corners where they need to be. I try to align the seam of both the lining and the bag together. That sort of helps me make sure it's going to be squared off the way I want it. I'm going to put a pin there actually. Just mark that side and gather the other side seam. And that. Okay. Take your handles and tuck them all the way down because we're going to sew around the edge. You want to use a 1/2 inch seam, 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch seam. I use the edge of my presser foot and back stitch at beginning and end. Remember to pull out your pins, move your clips. Remember, if you've got clips going all the way around, as you turn that, you might run into it. So you just want to be careful there. So here I have my lining sewn all the way around. And now we're going to test that hole we left inside. So we're going to pull the bag. Find my hole, there's my hole. We're going to pull the bag through this hole. You want to be careful, we don't want to pull any stitches. Okay. Woo! Look at that. So, but before we tuck that in, find your hole. We need to sew that real quick. And again, since it's the inside, we're just gonna do a quick stitch. I'm gonna go iron this closed real quick just to keep it nice and flush. Again, just the lining. Who's really gonna see? So now we can find those pins we put at the handles. There you have it. My lining is in. I love it. Last thing we want to do is we want to top stitch the top of the bag, because see how that's rolling right there? We don't want that at all. So we want to roll the top seam down and into the inside, and we're going to pin the handles, because we're actually going to sew the handles right there at the top. So we need to roll this down because we don't want any of that lining coming up. And we want to pin our handles right there at the top, because we're actually going to sew right across our handles to get a nice fold. So I'm going to pin. I'm actually going to pin in a few places because I know how I am, and I just want to keep that edge nice and rolled. Okay, so I'm just about there. So, I'm gonna put on my handy dandy gloves. Love my gloves. And we're just gonna sew this. I'm gonna go pretty slow so that I don't get anything caught up. In fact, I think I'm going to remove my little plate here with my bag around it and not get quite as snagged. So, I'm gonna start here. And again, I think I'm just going to use my presser foot as my guide, pulling out that first pin. And go around. Snip those threads. And I'm happy to say we have ourselves a great tote. So good job. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time here at the Quilting Bee. Anyone can quilt, including me.